Okay, welcome back, everyone. Now, for the next lecture, we have Professor Mark Skousen. He is a professor of economics at Chapman University, considered America's economist, and the Doti-Spogli Chair. Mark, it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for joining us again for our first day of the third cohort of the Menger Academy.
Great. Thank you, Matthew. Thank you. Okay, so I'm in the camera. You can see me okay?
Yep.
Oh, yeah, right. They're very good. Okay. And I also have some things on display here. I have a copy of my book, The Making of Modern Economics, which you can see also on the screen. I have a bust of Adam Smith, who is on the cover of The Making of Modern Economics. So I think he represents the hero of modern economics, starting in the 18th, 19th centuries. Then I have my new book here, The Greatest American, uh, which is a case for Ben Franklin as the greatest American, who had 20 different careers, and heavily influenced by Adam Smith as a free market, laissez-faire advocate. So I have a whole chapter on Benjamin Franklin as Adam Smith's invisible hand, because the comments that Adam Smith made in The Wealth of Nations, which is a copy here I have in paperback, believe it or not, beach reading, not quite, but that's but there's a whole section in The Wealth of Nations devoted to America and the future of America. And basically, Adam Smith argues that, predicts that the United States will be a formidable nation who will rule the world in the next couple of centuries. And I believe his positive view about the United States, and also advocating that the United States be independent. And that was very controversial. I mean, he was a British citizen, and he was coming out in 1776 in favor of American independence, as opposed to Edward Gibbon and other uh, British experts who were very much opposed to the colonies becoming independent. So I think Franklin and Smith have a lot in common there. Yeah, and that's the basis of my chapter 29 in The Greatest American. Um, I've also got a copy of his book, The Theory of Moral Sentiments. So those are the two volumes that Adam Smith wrote. But the purpose of this 1 hour discussion is to talk about history and the role that history plays, especially the history of economics and economic activity that occurred. Really, there are so many instances where ideas in economics came out of historical events, like the Enlightenment and the uh, uh, the Industrial Revolution. Really were very much in the mind of Adam Smith in coming up with this great theory of his, which he called the system of natural liberty. And I'll explain where that came from. Um, then in the 19th century, you had the rise of Karl Marx, and Marx was very critical of capitalism. He actually invented the term capitalism. And it turns out that the negative side of the Industrial Revolution, how it affected workers and the movement of people in the big cities and all of that came out of the Industrial Revolution, that's what encouraged um, Keynes or Marx to make his anti-capitalist viewpoint, which we still suffer from even today. And then in the 20th century, the Great Depression definitely caused John Maynard Keynes to come up with his so-called general theory of employment, interest, and money. Turns out that it's a special case and not a general theory. But unfortunately, Keynesian economics has become generally adopted. The constant running of deficit spending, inflation, and so forth all came out of the Keynesian revolution. So it's very important to study history And I think that Darren has made that point, that how important history is in understanding what's happening in the economy and in the models that we use today in economics. So I've written this book called The Making of Modern Economics. It's not the first history of economics. As you can see here, there are quite a few different histories of economics. The Worldly Philosophers is the most famous one, that was written by Robert Heilbroner. Heilbroner was a socialist. He tried to hide that in his book, The Worldly Philosophers. But he came up with the best title ever in the history of economics when it comes to books, The Worldly Philosophers. And he's actually quite positive about Adam Smith, but his favorite economists are clearly Marx, Keynes, and Veblen. And so I actually approached Murray Rothbard in 1980 and commissioned him. I said, would you like to write an alternative to Heilbroner? It has to be one volume, 12 chapters, and you need to do it in a year. And he agreed to do it, and I paid him $20,000 advance. Well, a year came and gone, and I turned out that he was writing a Schumpeterian tome from the Austrian perspective, and he never did complete his book. He completed half of it. He got into the beginning of the 20th century. He'd have chapters on the Greeks and the Romans in the Middle Ages, and the Austrian school and the Spanish scholastics as well. The British school, the Austrians, the French laissez-faire.
Chinese school.
What?
Chinese.
Yeah, he even had stuff on China. So I mean, it's 2 volumes and it's thousands of pages long. It was not what I asked him to do, but we're glad he did it. And unfortunately, he died in 1995 of a heart attack. And so the 2 volumes came out, and that's all we have. But it's definitely one that you want to read. Then we've had Larry White write a history of economics in the 20th century, and we've had several different works that have tried to give us a sense of history and how economics has evolved. So this is kind of a chart to show you how convoluted economics can be when it comes to the history of thought and all the different schools of economics that you can see there. And as you can see from this chart, it's a hodgepodge. And most histories of thought do not have a central theme. There's no truth in economic history or history of economics. There's this economist who says this, there's this economist who says that. There's no plot, there's no running thesis that runs through it. So what I tried to do in my book, which is unique, my unique contribution to economics, is I decided to write this after Rothbard had passed away. And I thought, well, after 20 years of dealing with history of thought, I think I could write this book. And so my book is 1 volume, as you can see. It's 15 chapters. And the unique thing about it is that it has a hero. The hero is Adam Smith and his system of natural liberty. And every economist is judged by whether he's improving upon or tearing down the house that Adam Smith built. And so Adam Smith starts with his system of natural liberty, which I'll explain. And then we have the laissez-faire, French laissez-faire school. We have Ricardo and Malthus, which was a kind of a distraction moving away from the Adam Smith model in a lot of ways, and actually gave support for the Marxists. And then I have chapters on Marx, the Austrian school, and who kind of saves the Adam Smith model. And in fact, when you read Carl Menger, when he wrote the Grundsatz, the Principles of Economics, he said he wrote with great frenzy because he recognized the errors of the Adam Smith model that failed to include marginal analysis and subjective analysis, which the Austrians were famous for. And so the principles of economics is actually forms the foundation of both a correct view of microeconomics and macroeconomics. So the principles of economics by Carl Menger is extremely valuable for building a correct view of how the economy works. And so we avoid the hodgepodge that you see in those graphs. Now, if you're in political science, you know that there's this pendulum approach to competing economic and political theories, and it has totally taken over the world. Everything is either left wing or right wing. And here you can see the extreme left is Karl Marx representing totalitarian government. On the extreme right, you have laissez-faire, Adam Smith, and then in the middle, you have Keynes that represents big government. So you have a spectrum going from limited government or even no government all the way over to total government. And then in the middle is Keynes, which represents big government. Now, if you accept the pendulum approach, where does the pendulum stop in equilibrium? In the middle, right? In the middle, it stops. Well, that suggests that Keynes, big government, the welfare state, somehow offers the best way, the best model to adopt. And I've rejected that. To me, the Adam Smith model is offers better opportunities, faster economic growth that can improve the lives of everybody. And Marx, on the other hand, has proven socialism and communism has proved to be a disaster. So I don't like the equality that you see between the left wing and the right wing, like they're both equally bad. And only Keynes in the middle is good. So what I adopted was the totem pole approach to economics. So this is very different. In the totem pole of economics, as you can see, and I commissioned a Native American to actually create this totem pole. I have it in my home. And I have Adam Smith at the top. Laissez-faire is the best policies for economic growth and benefiting everybody and higher standards of living. And then Keynes is second because Keynes did not reject laissez-faire completely. He basically said microeconomics should be laissez-faire, but macroeconomics should be big spending and the welfare state and all that sort of thing. So I put him in the middle, and then low man on the totem pole is Karl Marx. Now, my Marxist friends don't mind this. They said, oh, yeah, we're the foundation. We're the foundation of economics. So this is great that we're low man on the totem pole. So, but what I'm suggesting in the Economic Freedom Index proves this, that the more you adopt the Adam Smith model of laissez-faire, you do grow more and you benefit everybody. The rich get richer, but the poor get richer as well, and you can live fulfilling lives. Keynesian economics results in economic growth, but it's slower economic growth due to the welfare state and the burdens of government. And then the worst is the Marxist model, which has been tried over and over again and hasn't really been successful. Now, I actually do an exercise with students, which I will bring up later on in the lecture, to demonstrate why socialism cannot work. It cannot work. And so even those socialists who say, well, it just hasn't been done right, are incorrect. And I'll explain why that's the case later on in my lecture. So I've written a shorter version of The Making of Modern Economics, kind of a popular book called The Big Three in Economics. And it's been translated in a number of languages. So the big three in economics are Adam Smith, John Maynard Keynes, and Karl Marx. to show you how the translation can get varied. So here is the Arabic version, the translation. And instead of Adam Smith being on the top, guess who is on the top? It's Marx. And then they have Adam Smith and Keynes below Marx. They have Marx on the top. Now, that was deliberate because if you look at the Middle East, they're heavily influenced by Marxist doctrine. And that's why they haven't grown, with the exception of the oil companies. And that's because they've made some fundamental positive decisions in creating a sovereign fund and not wasting all the oil money like Venezuela did. So anyway, I found that really shocking because, and that's okay. I'm actually glad they did this because all the Middle Eastern readers are going to pick up this book saying, "Oh man, Marx is going to turn out to be great." And then when they read the book, they're going to discover that Marx is the bad guy in the whole economic scheme of things, and Adam Smith is the best. So maybe it'll have some positive influence. So these are some statements here in the. I guess I can look at it over here. Maybe I look at it over here. So I have a quote from Wesley Mitchell. Wesley Mitchell gave a series of lectures on the history of economics. He was a Columbia professor that established the NBER, National Bureau of Economic Research, which is the foremost research organization of the economics field. And Mitchell was a top economist at Columbia University in the 1930s. And he said, Adam Smith did for economics in many ways what Charles Darwin did for biology, a new framework. And then Jerry Mueller is teaches at Catholic University of America in Washington, D.C. He's an historian. He said, The Wealth of Nations is the most important book ever written about capitalism and its moral ramifications. It was intended to make men better, not just better off. And George Stigler said, he's at the University of Chicago, and there's a great portrait of George Stigler, who was a colleague of Milton Friedman. And there's a portrait of him holding a copy of The Wealth of Nations. And so this statement by Stigler is very important. Adam Smith had one overwhelmingly important triumph. He put into the center of economics the systematic analysis of the behavior of individuals pursuing their own self-interest under conditions of competition. And then Jean-Baptiste Say of the French school, this is after Adam Smith had passed away, Jean-Baptiste Say imitated Adam Smith and, in fact, was often called the French Adam Smith when he wrote his textbook in 1803. He said, when we read this work, that is The Wealth of Nations, we feel previous to Smith, there is no such thing as political economy. Now, of course, that's not true, but nevertheless, that's how he felt the impact of this book, The Wealth of Nations. And there's actually a book called Across All Nations, Translations and Influence of the Wealth of Nations, since it was published in 1776. And being published in 1776 is really significant because 1776 is the miracle year, the year of the Declaration of Political Independence for Thomas Jefferson, and Adam Smith's The Wealth of Nations, which was the Declaration of Economic Independence. And there's so many laissez-faire, limited government, free trade, tax on mercantilism. There's some really great quotes that libertarians need to know about in The Wealth of Nations. So who was Adam Smith? Born in 1723. So we recently celebrated the 300th anniversary. I went to Edinburgh and gave a lecture on his 300th anniversary of his birth. He was Scottish, not English, Scottish philosopher. And the Scottish form of the Enlightenment with David Hume and others is really probably the most significant breakthrough in entrepreneurship and economics and so forth. Also, the author of The Theory of Moral Sentiments, right here, The Theory of Moral Sentiments makes the case that humans are naturally attracted to having sympathy for his fellow man. Well, in The Wealth of Nations, the emphasis is on self-interest. So the Germans said, well, that's the Das Adam Smith Problem. In other words, which is it? Is it sympathy for your fellow man, or is it self-interest? And the answer really is pretty evident that when he wrote The Theory of Moral Sentiments, he was talking about small communities. Well, if you're in a small community, you know everybody. So you're sympathetic and you try to do things for your brothers and sisters and your relatives. It's kind of the old Chinese model or the mafia model, right? You make sure you help out those you know. There aren't any strangers in a small community. And so sympathy is very powerful. However, when he wrote The Wealth of Nations, this was the beginning of the big cities, London, Paris, Germany, and there were 1 million people in London at that time. Well, when you live in a city, a big city, you're a stranger. I mean, you have relatives and stuff, but when you deal with business, when you're taking on a job, you're applying to strangers. And so self-interest becomes your number one emphasis. So there was no contradiction. It was just a different period of time that we're looking at here. So Theory of Moral Sentiments, 1759, and then some years later, he spent some time in France, became familiar with the physiocrats and the laissez-faire advocates, and that definitely had a huge influence on The Wealth of Nations. Now, you won't find the word laissez-faire in The Wealth of Nations, but you will see lots of references to free market points of view there. You won't even find the word entrepreneur in The Wealth of Nations. He unfortunately translated it instead of using the term laissez-faire. And guess what term he used to translate entrepreneur? It would have been smart if he'd called it enterpriser or something like that. But he chose the word undertaker, which has a total different connotation. But you will find the word undertaker mentioned. A lot of people say, hey, there's nothing about entrepreneurship in The Wealth of Nations. Well, that's because he used the term undertaker. It's pretty interesting. Okay. But what was the book all about? Now, a lot of people say, well, it was a prescription. He wrote the book to government officials in Britain, and which is true. The last two books of the 5 books of The Wealth of Nations is addressed to legislators and dealing with policies like tariffs and budgets and fiscal policy, monetary policy. All of that is in there. There's no question about that he wanted to influence the powers that be. But from economics point of view, what did he really want to do? And what he was trying to do is show that private interest could benefit the public, could benefit generally everybody, and not just after your own self-interest. And how is this possible? And if you look at that one verse, and what's really interesting is this invisible hand doctrine that we talk about, which is basically saying that if you pursue your own interests, you will frequently promote that of society. So how is it possible that private interest could result in public benefit? And we all know the answer to that. We've read Leonard Read's book, I Pencil, a little pamphlet, I Pencil, and stuff like that. But I have a great quote here from Benjamin Friedman, not Milton Friedman, Benjamin Friedman, who teaches at Harvard. And he said, there's no presumption that people's pursuing their own self-interest, even if they perceive it correctly, would have any more broadly beneficial consequences. Quite the contrary. So much so that acting purely on one's individual self-interest, which we would call selfishness, was taken as a vice. And even today, if you're a selfish person, it's viewed as a vice, despite what Ayn Rand says. And the standard adjective to such behavior was vicious. That's where the term vicious came from, was this selfish acts. Before then, the mercantilists of the 17th century had likewise been skeptical that individually motivated behavior could make a nation's economy better off. Their approach was to run economic affairs from the top down. And that's what mercantilism is all about. And Adam Smith has this huge section attacking mercantilism of this top-down government, constantly telling you what kind of occupation you could have with the apprentices, where you could live. You actually had to have permit. I don't know if you knew this or not, but back in Adam Smith's day, you had to have permission to move from one country to another or from one city to another. They had so much, they dominated and controlled what you would do. Adam Smith opposed all of that. He said, we need to give them freedom. And if you adopt my system of natural liberty, you will be able to convert or channel private interest into the public interest. And how's that possible? One of the things that he did was he was very taken with Sir Isaac Newton. Sir Isaac Newton developed the first natural sciences, which is what physical sciences were called back then. It's called natural philosophy. And you'd take classes in natural philosophy. You were taking a class in physics, chemistry, and biology, and genetics, and all that's, well, before genetics. But Adam Smith said, wow, this Newtonian physics, I wonder if we can apply that to the social sciences, to human behavior. And instead of just the rocks and the elements and the air and so forth, maybe we can apply it to humans. So that was Adam Smith's purpose. And there's this quote here from historian Heatherton. He says, Adam Smith's efforts to discover the general laws of economics were directly inspired and shaped by the example of Newton's success in discovering the natural laws of motion. So he wanted to find, what are the natural laws, like you were talking about in your lecture, what are the natural laws of human action? And are they the same as science, or are they different? Of course, we know they're different. Mises says it's called methodological dualism, that there's a gulf between the social sciences and the physical sciences, and they will never come together. So the idea that through AI, computers can think and act human and be emotional, that we would reject that. That's not possible. They may appear to be emotional and so forth, but that's because we've just put that in them so that they could act like that. So this quote from page 57 and 58 in book 1 of The Wealth of Nations, look at this quote. When the quantity brought to market is just sufficient to supply the effectual demand and no more, the market price naturally comes to the central price, to which the price of all commodities are continually gravitating. Does that sound Newtonian? You know, equilibrium and gravity, central price. And of course, we try to imitate that. You know, Alfred Marshall tried to imitate the physical sciences when he created science with the words velocity, inflation, equilibrium. I mean, these are all terms that he borrowed from physics, and inappropriately in a lot of ways, but nevertheless that he was trying to create that. But Adam Smith said, well, we've been trying to imitate this approach. And of course, Keynes later on did the same thing with Einstein, with relative and special relativity, or general theory and special theory of modeling. So if there's anything you can want to remember about my lecture, is that I believe I've discovered, I don't think anybody else has found this, but I found it on page 651 of The Wealth of Nations. Now, you know, when you write a big book and you have a thesis, how can private interests benefit the public? That's the main economic thesis that Adam Smith had. Does he introduce it in the introduction, which is what normal people would do? Well, yes. You'll say, here's my thesis, and you write that in the introduction. Adam Smith didn't do that. He waited to page 651 of a 900-page book. He hid it inside book 4 of The Wealth of Nations. And here is the quote. So this quote in one paragraph describes what Adam Smith's model is, how he solved the problem of the invisible hand problem. He said, every man, as long as he does not violate the laws of justice, is left perfectly free to pursue his own interest in his own way and to bring both his industry and capital into competition with those of any other man or order of men. So here's what he's saying. He's saying, in order for private interest to become the public interest, you have to channel the public interest through this tunnel. And what forms the tunnel? On one side, it's the laws of justice. It's the rules, the game, the rules of the game that you play. It's bankruptcy law. It's independent judiciary. It's common law that the British have developed. This was all of the things that he favored. So he's not an anarchist, okay? He's not Rothbard. He believes in government. You need this to control the passions of humans who men in business who deceive and engage in frauds and so forth. And how can you minimize that? How can you moderate the passions? He's not saying eliminate. You cannot eliminate this, but you can channel it so that you minimize and reduce the level. And this is why he says frequently pursues, not always, but frequently pursues it. And what's the other side of the road? Robust competition. He uses the term competition. Why? Because if you have had fraud committed against you, you want the ability to go to another competitor and say, hey, this guy screwed me. What can you do to make it up? And we see this all the time in business, where as a customer, you have the right to go to someone else to pursue this. So he's very much against monopoly. And he actually speaks out against big business that conspire to engage in monopoly power. Adam Smith is a big advocate of competition, robust competition. And so you want to develop a model. It's called the Adam Smith model in a country where you have the rule of law and how the game is played, and you know what the rules are, and they're basic and they're not too complex. You keep them simple, and robust competition. And if you have those together, then frequently you can convert private interest into the public benefit. And that's his model. And it's found on page 651, buried in the history. So I've actually Googled this and said, has anybody ever quoted page 651, this quote? And nobody has. So I think this is my own discovery. And it's kind of cool that I was able to come up with that. Okay, so Adam Smith model promises very high hopes. Number one, prosperity for all, the end of poverty. He says, if you adopt my system of natural liberty, you will have universal opulence that extends to the lowest ranks of the people. Well, this has got to be great news for the peasants, the French peasants and the German workers and the British factory workers and stuff like that, or the Chinese who are just struggling by at $1 a day, to say, oh my gosh, what is this model that he's promising so much? Number two, he a firm believer in maximizing freedom and preserving individual rights. So within this tunnel, you maximize freedom to do what you want to do within the rule of law and understand robust competition. So you don't minimize freedom, you maximize it. Now, this is a quote that Murray Rothbard never quoted in his critique of Adam Smith. But listen to this, because a lot of people criticize Adam Smith. Well, he was a utilitarian. He didn't really believe in human rights. Listen to this quote. To prohibit a great people from making all that they can of every part of their own produce or from employing their stock and industry in a way that they judge most advantageous to themselves is a manifest violation of the most sacred rights of mankind. Oh my gosh. I mean, Murray Rothbard couldn't have said it any better. It's an unbelievable quote about sacred rights of man. What? Employment freedom? Economic freedom is sacred? You don't normally hear that. You know, you talk about the right to vote and political freedom. Sure, yeah. Free speech, yeah, fine. But economic freedom, that's what this is talking about. The anarchists would like this. Okay, number 3, improve civil society, mutual benevolence, and make people better, not just better off. And what do we mean by that? While you can find criticism of Adam Smith about business people, he was definitely in favor of what we call commercial society, because what does commercial society do for you? Well, if you're a worker, it forces you to show up on time. It causes you to be educated and trained, and you have discipline. When you've all had part-time jobs or full-time jobs, you don't just do whatever you want to do. You have rules and regulations. Commercial society encourages educated people, getting to know your customer, knowing the most advanced technologies, discipline and personal honesty. You want an honest employer. I mean, how often do employers say, hey, we'll let you do whatever you want to do? No, you've got to be honest with your customers and so forth, and transparent. So there's a tremendous number of virtues that come out of the commercial society that Adam Smith advocated. And by the way, Benjamin Franklin did as well. He was a big defender of commercial society and even a defender of speculation. And back in the day, speculation was considered a vice and was opposed by Aristotle and Plato and all these people. They condemned it. The Christian nations, Paul condemned speculation. And the root of all evil, money is the root of all evil. The love of money is the root of all evil. So there's a lot to be said for both Adam Smith and Ben Franklin on commercial society being a good thing. So this is a quote from Alan Greenspan, the Fed chairman, who was friends with Ayn Rand. And he wrote this book, co-authored this book, Capitalism in America. And look what he said. Adam Smith advanced a vision of a dynamic society in which wealth multiplied, not adding, multiplied, and opportunities abounded. In doing so, he performed a remarkable intellectual somersault. The intellectual somersault is this invisible hand idea. Until this point, people have generally regarded the pursuit of self-interest at its best unseemly and at worst sinful. Smith countered that, provided it took place within the constraints of law and morality, and the purpose of self-interest boosted the well-being of the entire nation. Now, he leaves out the competition part, which he should have added, because that's absolutely critical. But the rule of law, morality is really an important concept. So I really like that quote from Alan Greenspan. It really kind of captured the essence of what we're talking about here. So, let me go back. So there are 3 elements of the Adam Smith model. One is the limited role of government, the need for justice and the rules of the game. He makes the statement that little else is requisite to carry a state to the highest degree of opulence from the lowest barbarism. I changed that from lowest barbarism to the highest degree of opulence. What are the elements? Peace, easy taxes, and a tolerable administration of justice. Now, I would add on there sound money. You've got to have sound money as well. You can't have runaway inflation. But peace, absolutely peace. I mean, is there any economic progress in Ukraine right now? In the Middle East, in the Palestinian states who are constantly trying to fight the Israelis? No, there's no increase in standard of living. Easy taxes. Do we have easy taxes? Well, in some countries they do, but not the United States. poll people all the time. I said, are taxes easy? You know how you can tell whether taxes are easy or not? You don't try to get around. You don't try to hide your money. You don't try to engage in tax shelters. You just pay the tax because it's so cheap. And Russia is a classic example of this. When Russia was freed in the 1920 in 1992, and so they say, well, we'll adopt the Western progressive taxation and tax rate 70%. Well, the Russian mafia said, forget that. We're not paying that. And they didn't. And they got very little revenue from that. So under Putin, of all people, under Putin, they imposed a 13% tax. And now everybody pays it, and they're able to get that revenue. So it's an example of the Laffer curve. Okay. Number two is free to choose. Very important you have that freedom to make your own decisions. Don't depend on the government to tell you what to do. You know best. He says there's a Scotsman in every man, because Scotsmen were self-interested and very shrewd in their in the way they perform. And it's not just the Scots as well. I mean, there's a lot of people that are focused in that. And let's see. And then finally, robust competitive marketplace. And Robert Heilbronner, a socialist, actually says, I won't take time with this, but he actually makes it that the marketplace is great for getting the best deal and getting the product that you actually want without being defrauded. Competitive cooperation is what you get. So I like this quote from Dinesh D'Souza: capitalism civilizes greed in the same way that marriage civilizes lust. Greed, like lust, is part of our human nature. It would be futile to try to root it out. What capitalism does is channel greed in such a way as it works to meet the wants and needs of society. I thought that was a really, really good quote. I'm going to skip the thing on mercantilism. That's definitely fascinating about all the trouble that the mercantilist society created. But let me just go back. Wesley Mitchell, the Columbian professor, said the best policy, according to Adam Smith, the best policy for governments is to interfere as little as possible with the occupations and investments of its citizens. And we need to repeat this all the time, this basic thesis, to interfere as little as possible with the occupations and investments of its citizens. And even today, you have presidents who want to intervene and tell you what investments to get into and what not to get into. It's part of human nature, but it's not the Adam Smith model. Well, what did the Adam Smith call for? What did the Adam Smith call his model? So some people say it's laissez-faire, invisible hand, free market capitalism, free enterprise, or system of natural liberty. Which one did he actually use in his book? Over and over again, system of natural liberty. And actually, a few times, system of perfect liberty. He actually used the term perfect liberty. It's kind of interesting. But he never said laissez-faire. Invisible hand. How many times does the invisible hand show up? Once. So is it vital? Is it important? There it is, invisible hand. But guess what? It's right in the middle of the book. It's central to his theme. And some people think he cleverly put it in just once to create problems. So we have a second example. Theory of moral sentiments. The invisible hand is used only once. Guess where it is? It's right in the middle of the book again. So we have two witnesses, but it may not be enough to prove our thesis. There's a big debate going on. But a lot of the critics of Adam Smith said, no, it's marginal because he only mentions it once. It's marginal. But the supporters say, yeah, but look where it's located, right in the center. It's kind of a fun debate. I talk about it in my book, The Making of Modern Economics. Okay. Brad DeLong, who is at Berkeley University, these guys who are not necessarily laissez-faire people, they really do say things that are really powerful. It says Smith chose liberty because it leaves people free to do what they want with their labor and their possessions. Natural because it confirms human nature. System because it can be extended to the status of a general principle. Let people decide what they want to do with their things and their labor, and they arrange themselves in a largely highly productive societal division of labor. Self-interest focuses people on creating value, gives them incentives. Competition curbs any distracted focus of self-interest on accomplishing exploitation. So it's a really great quote. So notice I said what he called his name. He said the system of natural liberty. Notice he did not call it the system of social justice. Notice that he did not call it the system of social equality. He used the term liberty, specifically as the highest ideal. System of natural liberty is the highest ideal. And if you make equality the highest ideal, if you make social justice the highest ideal, you might lose a lot of freedom on the way to achieving those. And Milton Friedman would say that a number of times. So the Adam Smith model is pro-savings, limited government and low taxes, sound money, the gold standard back then, tolerable administration of justice. Notice he said tolerable, not perfect, tolerable administration of justice. And of course, free trade. Now, a lot of these are under attack today, aren't they? Pro-savings? No, a lot of times it's pro-consumption. What stimulates the economy? Consumer spending. Limited government and low taxes? Well, I think in a lot of ways we have unlimited government and high taxes. Sound money, the gold standard? We have entered an era of permanent inflation. There's charts that show since World War II, we've entered an era of permanent inflation. And the inflation rate may come down, the inflation rate may go up, but there's never deflation. Prior to World War II, we actually had virtually no inflation, except due to wars, and then after the war, it'd come back down. But after World War II, and I have a whole chart on that, but that's a different lecture. So let's go. We start with the Adam Smith model on the top, and I put the Austrian school in there as one of the wings, along with the Chicago school and the supply siders. They're all trying to achieve maximum freedom and maximum prosperity. And we have arguments over which is better, but still we're all in the same camp. We need to understand that the enemy is not within, the enemy is out. It's out there. It's not in here with our free market, even though we fight all the time over this. The Keynesian model does just the opposite. What? It encourages consumption over saving, runs deliberate deficits in public works during slumps and even during periods of prosperity. Permanent easy money. Taxation should be progressive. Big government, welfare state is a built-in stabilizer, which is true. During recessions, governments paying people to keep consuming and stuff like that. But and that does stabilize the economy, but you get slower growth. Your price is slower growth because of it. And you'll notice that GDP lately looks really good, right? But if you break it down, it's because consumer spending is the only thing going up right now. Business spending is flat. Job growth is non-existent. You need 250,000 new jobs created per month. Did you know this in the United States, just to keep up with population growth? 250,000. You know how much we had last month? 60,000 growth. So we actually went backwards in that respect. Okay. And then fair trade over free trade. Although Keynes was largely a free trader, but during the war, he favored tariffs and stuff like that. And it is really unfortunate that the Republican Party that used to be a big defender of free trade is now giving all these excuses to support Trump's protectionist measures and Fortress America. I call it Fortress America. It's not America first. It's Fortress America. And you know the difference between a fortress, a castle, and a city? You know what the difference is? In a city, you come and go, right? You come and go as you please. In a castle, you got a moat, and they know where you're coming in, they know who's coming in, and they know who's coming out. And we're building a castle, a fortress, and we should be building cities. It's a big difference. Now let's go quickly to the Karl Marx model. Workers are exploited by capitalists. The labor theory of value, that value is determined by labor and not what is demanded. The theory of surplus value, that due to exploitation, the surplus is the money that the workers send to the capitalists, the profits they make, that's surplus, and it's illegitimate and needs to be abolished. He predicted falling prices and the accumulation of capital. We haven't had that in a long time. And that capitalism is constantly facing a crisis. They do have one thing in common with the Austrians. The Austrians tend to be pessimists, and so do the Marxists. They're always predicting collapse and a crisis. I'm an exception to that. I'm looking more at the bull markets than bear markets. The imperialism of monopoly capitalism. Now, this is an interesting aspect of Marxism because you do see expansion in an imperialistic model that business does. Take McDonald's, for example. McDonald's got started in Southern California. The very first McDonald's is here in Southern California, still around. You can go and see it. And it became so successful, they started branching out and setting up franchises. Now they're all over the United States. Well, that's not good enough. Now they want to be worldwide, and they are worldwide. Starbucks, same thing. So Marx has an interesting observation how capitalism does tend to want to expand your markets constantly. It's kind of an interesting aspect. They think it's negative. I think it's positive. The one thing that Karl Marx did introduce, his eureka moment, was his theory of historical materialism. Because it was often viewed that in political science, you'll see, well, what is the basis of our laws and our institutions? Well, religion. Religion formed a big foundation. You know, if you go to Islam and so on, Muhammad had a tremendous influence. Christ had a tremendous influence on creating institutions and laws and stuff like that. Marx said, well, actually, I think it's economic interest. It's the economic self-interest, what you're producing that causes you. Venezuela has oil. It's their main commodity. Well, that's been the basis of their entire economic and their legal system to defend the oil interests. It's an interesting philosophy, this historical materialism that Marx created. And I think there's a lot of support evidence for that. So when I teach the class on Marx, I don't 90% negative, but there's some things that he said that were, I think, profound. The final thing I want to mention is the Economic Freedom Index is a way of measuring, quantitative measurement of the Adam Smith model system of natural liberty. Because if you look at the 5 criteria for the Economic Freedom Index that's done by the Fraser Institute and the Heritage Foundation, size of government tax policy, legal structure, the rule of law, sound money, freedom to trade, free trade, and regulation of businesses. That's all part of the Adam Smith model. And the fewer, the better. What do we find out? Well, we can see here the Adam Smith model reveals that countries that adopt the Adam Smith model grow faster. That's what this chart shows. So it's a really very powerful argument. Now, the dangers of economic freedom, he warned of the extravagance of government and the greatest errors of administration. And when you do that, economic freedom declines. And it has been declining recently. And I don't think Trump has necessarily reversed that. There's a lot of intervention going on. But the overall picture is still pretty positive. Now, this is the U.S. Economic Freedom Index. You'll notice it topped out in 2001 is when it topped out. So what happened in 2001? 9/11. And what did we get out of 9/11? The Patriot Act, war in Iraq, war in Afghanistan, permanent war. Seems like our economic freedom index has not really reversed itself. We've had a downward trend in the United States. As you can see around the world, if I go back here, you can see the collapse of the Berlin Wall and the collapse and China opening up its economy caused the World Economic Freedom Index to rise. It's only started declining since 9/11. So I think that's a really important point. And then The Economist in 2023 said governments have jettisoned the principles that made the world rich, free trade and the modest role for government. Today we face an overburdened government, rising taxes, rising debt, and excessive regulation. And that's The Economist. They're making a pretty bold statement there that we need to be concerned about where we're headed. And one of the reasons Darren and the Carl Menger Institute is growing is because we're trying to reverse this tide, reverse the trend. So in my book, what's unique about my book is Adam Smith is the hero. His system of natural liberty is the protagonist model, comes under attack by the socialists, the Marxists, and the Keynesians, left for dead on several occasions, and then resuscitated by the French laissez-faire school, the Austrian School of Economics to some extent, and then the Chicago School of Economics, and the supply-siders. And then in the end, I have a really positive story, the collapse of the Berlin Wall, the Soviet model of socialism declined, disappeared. And since then, capitalism has flourished in many countries. I mean, privatization going on, lower taxes, lots of things. You've had Singapore become a juggernaut of economic freedom. South Korea has blossomed. The four tigers. Even Latin America, the Chile model overall has been a big success. You do have these pullbacks in Venezuela and some places in the United States, but I think overall we've seen some real success stories that we can celebrate. So I feel very honored about my book, the Making of Modern Economics. It's in its fourth edition. It's been translated into a number of languages, and it won the Choice Book Award for Outstanding Academic Title. It's ranked number 2 by the Ayn Rand Institute as the best libertarian book in economics, right behind Henry Hazlitt's Economics in One Lesson. So that's some pretty good company. Roger Garrison, the Austrian professor at Auburn, he's now retired, says, my students love the Making of Modern Economics, makes economics come alive. My textbook is the only economics textbook that actually has pictures and portraits of economists. It actually tells their personal stories. I have lots of anecdotes in there, and there's some humor in there, and lots of some graphs and charts and so forth. I have a little bit of everything in there, and each chapter begins with a classical music number to describe the economist. So, for example, for Marx, it's hosts Mars, the planets. You hear the music to horse on planet. It sounds like Darth Vader is ending the territory. It's pretty interesting, fun. So I have some quotes here from a variety of professors and others. My book's chapter on Marx, called Marx Madness, plunges economics into a new dark age. So you kind of know where I stand on Marx. And it was banned at the University of the Philippines, a hotbed of Marxism. They banned my book, refused to allow it in the library. So one of the students typed the entire chapter, personally typed it in and sent it around to everybody. Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then I have 2 chapters on Keynesian economics, which one economist said is the most devastating critique of Keynesian economics ever written. I have 4 chapters on the Austrian, Chicago, and supply-side schools of economics, more than any other in history. And this happened this last year. So I got a chance to meet Javier Milei, the most libertarian president in our history while I've been alive. But it's hard to get to actually meet. So I was down in Buenos Aires, and he spoke at a dinner and was leaving, and I was able to walk up and talk to him. And he said, "Oh, you're Mark Skousen. I've read your book and I love it. This is the Spanish translation of my book," and he just praised it, saying this is a great book and stuff. So that was kind of the highlight this year of my meeting a famous person. Oh yeah, the other quote from Milton Friedman: "All histories of economics are BS before Skousen." That was a pretty good quote. Michael Shermer said, "All matters economics today. I'm the next Milton Friedman." I don't know about that, but he was pretty short, 5 feet. I'm 5'9". And then Richard Ron, Washington Times, said my book is the best economics book he's ever read. John Mackey says it's fun to read on every page. I've read it 3 times. He goes hiking all around the world, and he listens to it on audio. And he's recommended it to dozens of friends. And Mark Blogg, who's the #1 writer or historian of economics, says it's unputdownable. Came up with a new word, unputdownable. And then finally, I want to mention this is the most amazing letter I've ever received. So Dick Armey is the former House Majority Leader. He has a Ph.D. in economics. He's founder of Freedom Works, strong advocate of flat tax, privatization, and free trade. So he wrote me this letter just last year. He says, "Dear Mark, in 2004, so this is 21 years ago, you gave me a copy of your book, The Making of Modern Economics. For some reason, I set it aside and did not rediscover it until recently. 21 years later, it picks up my book. More is the pity for me. I have now read it. I must say I was enthralled, edified, and entertained from start to finish. It is beyond all doubt the best book of its kind, and I've read many of them that I've ever read. Thank you for a gift beyond which might dare to hope, and please forgive me my remission." Well, yeah, that's got to be the best endorsement you've ever got. So you give somebody a book, he puts it on the bookshelf for 21 years, it's gathering dust, and for some reason he says, "Oh, maybe I ought to pick this book up and take a look at it." And then he gives me this high praise. I mean, it made my day, made my year in a lot of ways. So this is a little information if I've created some interest in the book. It's sold thousands of copies. I think this will be a book that will go way beyond my years of living. If hopefully I'll get somebody to update the book for new editions and stuff like that. But if you're interested you can get it. Publishers Routledge charges $55 for these books, and that's the paperback version. It's 500 pages paperback, and but I sell it for $37 if you go to skousenbooks.com, and I pay the postage. Except if it's overseas, it'll cost you more than the price of the book just to mail it. It'll probably cost you $40 to mail it, but I've had great success with this book. It's the thing I'm most proud of this book than any other book I've ever written. And I had a lot of fun writing it, and I've had really good success with it. So I do hope you will consider doing that. The other thing that is a passion of mine is FreedomFest. I do it every year. Darren, Menger, you've been 2 years in a row. And I mean, it's fun. You got to admit, everybody in the trade show for liberty in the exhibit hall, that's where all the action is. Everybody's talking and stuff like that. We've had some big name celebrities over the years. We have Shatner, George Foreman, John Mackey and Kevin O'Leary of Shark Tank, John Cleese, the British comedian. We had Mike Rowe in 2023. The Dirty Jobs guy. We've had Steven Pinker, Ice-T, Kennedy, Steve Forbes, Rob Snyder, and we haven't come up. We can't announce right now our big name speakers, but we're close to approving some pretty big names. And this next year, Freedom Fest. These are some of the people we've had before. Yeah, last year. Yeah, but we're calling it this year the World's Fair of Liberty because it's the 250th anniversary of our country's founding. And we want to do a World's Fair and bring in all the great advocates of liberty. So I hope all of you who are listening will make every effort to come to the United States. If you're a World Cup fan, soccer fan, it will be taking place in the United States. So we think while you're attending the World's Cup, you join us at the World's Fair of Liberty. And it's going to be July 8th to the 11th, 2026, right after July 4th celebration. And the World Cup is going to be going on. So go to freedomfest.com. We keep a low price because we're expecting several thousand people there. So with that, thank you all very much. I think we covered 50 minutes or something. I don't know if we went over time.